A 58-year-old broadcast institution was gutted this week by people who've never worked in a newsroom. The man who built his career documenting the inside of American power said the algorithms that are reshaping our world need to be disarmed. And the Pope agreed with him in writing and even spoke out about it. And the president announced a ceasefire that neither side said existed. I'm Richard Schreiber.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. When the Fairness Doctrine fell in 1987, and I did a little homework, won't get into it now, but about what that all means, encourage you all to look into the Fairness Doctrine. When it fell in 1987, it didn't just change what went on the air, it changed who got to decide. CBS News once had editorial independence written into its culture, and certainly as we've seen with CBS News, this week we watched that culture get fired. This is true journalism.
So our esteemed guest today, Bryan Mattimore, has spent 30 years teaching corporations how to generate big ideas systematically, repeatedly, and with discipline. Bryan's the co-founder of Growth Engine Company, author of 21 Days to a Big Idea, Idea Stormers, and Islands of Invention, along with 20 Questions Great Leaders Ask. Bryan is facilitator of over 1,000 ideation sessions, driving $3 billion in new business. Wow. Mattimore's latest work heavily focuses on combining traditional, proven group ideation frameworks with modern, cutting-edge generative AI to tackle complex institutional and corporate challenges. His latest book, however, we'll get to that shortly, is about the president. Bryan asks one question that matters. What's left after only a human can do? Bryan, welcome to True Journalism.
Thank you, Richard. I'm looking forward to this. You guys are doing a great thing with this podcast. I listened to your one last week and wow, this is really great stuff. So I'm honored to be on your show.
Thank you.
Yeah, can I tell our audience a little bit about Bryan's new book?
Absolutely.
Cool. I don't have it in my hand yet. I'm looking forward to getting a copy. It's Trump's Playbook, his 50 brand and influence strategies and how to use them ethically. Really on May 6th. The ethically is aforementioned. Love him or hate him, Donald Trump is one of the most effective marketers of our time. We've talked a lot about that on our show. In Trump's Playbook, innovation expert Bryan Mattimore reveals the 50 branding and influence strategies that helped fuel his rise to power, from crafting winning slogans and viral soundbites to orchestrating feuds, spectacles, and media firestorms. I haven't seen any of that, but I'll take your word for it. We see these same strategies at work not only in Trump's world, in his rise, but also in the success of cultural icons like Taylor Swift, Martha Stewart, Steve Jobs, and Lady Gaga, and historical greats Benjamin Franklin, Winston Churchill, and Muhammad Ali. I personally think Taylor is a historical figure, but that's just me. Creators will also discover how to flip the script on these influence strategies, combining them with proven idea generation techniques, which I've learned a lot about from Bryan over the years, as well as AI tools. We talk a lot about that on our show, most weeks as well, to create breakthrough marketing ideas for organization and brands as diverse as NPR, the Democratic Party, Harvard, Planned Parenthood, Disney, and even Oreo. The book is not only a guide to understanding Trump's skill as a marketer, it's also a toolkit to defending against manipulation. That's really what we're all about here. And for using these same strategies ethically to advance a career, a brand, or an organization. Sounds wonderful. I can't wait to hear more.
Yeah.
Thank you. I would just tell you guys that this has been a real, I'll call it psychic challenge for me for the last year to write this book because, oh my gosh, putting my attention on Donald Trump for a year, as we've all been in some ways forced to, but then to write stories about it and do the research. I didn't get a lot of sleep. I wasn't sleeping well. And I'll share an inside story here of the publication. Originally, I titled this Donald Trump Marketing Genius. And I had two covers, one with a red cap that said, "Make me great again," another with a blue cap that said, "Make America think again." And I launched that in March, and the controversy among friends and colleagues was so polarizing that I said, this is not going to work. And so that's why I reissued it with Donald Trump's Playbook and included, and Richard brought this out, the word ethically. And now I can sleep at night. So thank you.
Amazing. It reminds me of one of the earliest Woody Allen movies. If you ever saw that one, what's it? Take the Money
Take
and
the
Run.
money and run. Yeah.
And where he's sent to a prison camp and he was not behaving properly. So they let him into a little box down underground with an insurance salesman. Look, we have so I can imagine spending a year with Donald Trump. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. I guess one question that comes to mind, Brian, is to Tom's point. Yes, we all recognize that Trump is an expert marketer, an expert at rallying popular culture behind him through The Apprentice, through his association with the World Wrestling Federation. Somehow he was able to reach people on a guttural level, that people that were ignored. And I think that's part of his marketing genius. But I'm curious, what did you learn from studying Donald Trump that could be paradoxically used for good instead of, unfortunately, what some of the results have been in actuality?
Thank you for that question, because that was one of the reasons I was somewhat reticent to maybe even write this book. I said, can I flip this stuff for the good? And so that's why the last third of the book is really, okay, how do we take these 50 principles that I have identified and use them to help NPR and Disney and Planned Parenthood, et cetera. And I used AI, and I'm open about that because I want people to understand you can take these 50 principles, they're influence principles and branding strategies. You can throw them into AI and say, okay, now I'm trying to do X, fill in the blank, and give me 50 ideas. And AI will do that for you. So that's why intentionally the last third of the book is all about how you flip these strategies, right? And also I thought it was important to have experts weigh in on these strategies, because these are timeless strategies, and I can share a bunch of examples, obviously. But it's important to know that Donald Trump didn't necessarily invent these strategies. He just, in a lot of cases, took the darker side of using them. But it's important to know that these are, if you will, timeless influence strategies. And so in some ways, the great joy of writing this book, besides the psychic difficulty, was to research how these strategies have been used throughout history. One of the things you kind of have to admire about Donald Trump is the guy is confident. Oh my gosh, right? And he talks in absolutes, right? We see that in history. Probably the best example is Churchill, right? He didn't say we're kind of maybe sort of going to fight the Germans. We'll never surrender. He was talking in some ways you could call it false binary, but he's like, no, that's it. And that a true leader does that. When 9/11 happened, George Bush said, you're either with us or you're a terrorist. Again, this is a false binary, but it's smart leaders or provocative leaders or great leaders will do that. And so that's what the whole book is about, understanding what all these principles are, how they've been used through history, how they've been used by the entertainment industry in his case. Now, I will just say it was not a new idea that Trump is an entertainer, right? Richard, to your point, he came from The Apprentice and WWF, et cetera, et cetera. So that's not new. But what the eureka moment for me was when I went beyond him as an entertainer and began to look at him as a marketer. And as soon as I had that idea, because obviously my background is marketing and innovation and creativity, once I had that sort of bigger thought, I felt compelled to write the book, explain what these marketing principles were. And the hope then is that people would understand them. And I'm not trying to change people's minds. Nobody can change another person's mind. But I want to give people the raw material for their own thinking about how they decide one way or the other about Donald Trump.
If you could, what were the top 3 outcomes that you discovered among the 50 that might be the most impactful for people?
One of the ones, I don't know if these are the most impactful. If people want to read the book, these are fun examples throughout the book. But one of them that I hadn't really thought about, but as I thought about it and identified it, it was create spectacle on a shoestring, right? Was one of the title chapters, right? And if you
reference ball, right?
Yeah, Trump, he has these rallies and they buy these inexpensive MAGA hats, right? And he's up there dancing and playing music. Are you kidding? Presidential dancing poorly too, I might add. What presidential candidate? Yeah. But if you look through history, one of the great examples is Gandhi, right? Is 240-mile or 24-day salt march. What did it cost them? It cost them nothing, but the press covered it every day, right? And the Boston Tea Party, what did that cost? And so these spectacles on a shoestring, one of my most favorite examples that I knew about, but then when I researched, I was blown away. I'll just quickly tell the story. Muhammad Ali, actually Cassius Clay, obviously in the early 60s, Life magazine was going to do an interview with him about him and his training regimen, right? And by the way, that's another strategy. Appropriate a title for yourself. I am the greatest, right? So anyway, so they show up and he said, do you want to see my training routine? And they said, yeah, we'd like to. So he brought him over to the local pool and had him shoot photos of him from below. And this was for Life magazine. These photos, if you haven't seen them, are incredible. They're works of art. And we found out later, he didn't train that way. He made that up because he knew it would make for a great visual opportunity, if you will. And so that's a good example of what did that cost him? It cost him nothing. The point here is that the reader has to be creative about their own spectacles that they're creating. And they don't necessarily need to cost a lot of money.
The question along those lines, it might be better later in the conversation, but I can't resist asking it right now. And that is, we see that the Democrats are in a lot of trouble right now. Who is their standard bearer and what do they stand for? And how do you reconcile the Bernie Sanders or Van Deo saying, thank you, with other mainstream, and certainly Donald Trump simplified things. I remember a friend telling me 6, 7 years ago, don't you just love the slogan? It fits right on the cap like that. Whereas Hillary Clinton it was complicated and we need to understand this nuance here. And when I was at Harvard, here's how we did. I can see how that might rub millions of people the wrong way. Well, I don't want any of that.
Whitewater didn't
I'd like to
help
think
either.
that people are not so simple, but maybe people really are simple. I don't know.
I just wrote an editorial. I've submitted it to the Times. I haven't heard back yet. My chances of hearing back, I think, are 5 to 10%, but I'll try to get it in somewhere. But the title of this editorial is What Trump Understands and Many Institutions Still Don't About the Attention Economy, right? So that is the economy we're in, right? And that, of course, was based on the Nobel, Herbert Simon's work, the 1978 Nobel Prize winner in economics. I think his quote was something like, a wealth of information creates a poverty of attention. So what that means now is that we can't talk in policy papers, right? We have to talk in headlines and visuals and short narratives if you're gonna cut through, unfortunately. And that's the reality. And so given that, it's not that we should not have those policy ideas, but we just have to be creative and share them in ways that the public can grok them, can get them, because a policy paper is not going to make it. It really isn't.
Yeah. One question that you mentioned, Simon published this in 1971. So here it is, 50 plus years later, and we're now finally, because of Donald Trump, realizing and recognizing, well, and also with AI and the explosion of social media, we're in the perfect storm setting for a figure like Donald Trump.
Yes. Yeah. Part of the, I think, value of this book is, and forgive me for keep going back to it, cut me off if you want to, but one of the things that I thought was really important to not just say what he's done and how he's done it, but then to say, okay, so what? What are you going to do? And how can you communicate in ways that he has? How can you use these principles, which is, as I mentioned, that's the last section of the book. But in this editorial, for instance, I said on Trump on immigration, it's about fear and blah, blah, blah. And the economy, jobs are going away and our economy is going to hell and all the rest. Okay, so what do we do as positive, ethical communicators, right? And so I've got a couple here that I put in this editorial. On immigration, the message could simply be the American story continues. Immigration framed not as an invasion, but as a continuing American story of sacrifice, ambition, and reinvention, right? So same principle, but now we're talking on the positive side. On manufacturing, making things matter, a message centered on pride, craftsmanship, rebuilding communities, and creating work that gives people dignity and purpose. We need to inspire ourselves again, right? we've had the negative. We know from research that negative tends to get more social media shares than the positive. But if we take the positive side of these things, I think, to be honest, I think we've been so negativized in the communication these days that I do think the country is hungry for some positive messaging and framing of this stuff. And that's what I think the challenge and the opportunity is for the Democrats. I'll just share two others real quick. But on healthcare, no family left behind. Healthcare communicated as the simple promise that no family should lose everything because someone they love became ill. And then on the economy, this is probably my favorite of the four. The economy should work for people who work. Economic policy framed around the simple promise that hard work should still lead to stability, dignity, affordable housing, and the possibility of upward mobility. Not that these are revolutionary ideas, but at least it's on the positive side. And if you're like Mamdani, he got elected by, and this is one of the key principles, is staying on message, right?
Yeah.
You stay on message, you repeat this over and over again. His was obviously affordable housing. So you just hammer and bang these things home. And I think people will be inspired. And one of the reasons I wrote this book is, I hate to say it because it sounds overly self-important and self-aggrandizing, but I do think it's time to bring hope back.
Oh.
And so that's one of my goals for this book, to be fair, in this work.
It's interesting that there is an uptick in the number of people that are going back to church because, I think many people are looking for hope. The question I have, Bryan, is a lot of people that study in NLP and all kinds of the language of the brain and of our psychology is that we respond more readily to negativism.
Absolutely.
And that's one
A lifelong guy in the news business. I don't know what the hell you're talking about.
If it bleeds, it leads. My God.
all you have to do is turn on the news, and the first 24 minutes is nothing but murders, rapes, car theft.
When there's 10 and 11 or your child will die. Simple.
Yes.
And then at the end, they put on this feature story about a fireman who saves a cat in a tree, and people laugh at it, but it doesn't permeate.
Yes.
How do we recover our psyche, as you're suggesting, which I think is incredibly impactful, to really be attracted once again to the it happened with Barack Obama. I remember 2008. So we're not immune to that. I think the Democrats have to figure out a way to get back there.
Absolutely. And Obama was about hope. And oh my God, he's singing Amazing Grace. It's terrific theater, right? It's fantastic. And again, I think we're ready for it. But Richard, you're absolutely right. The research I've done, and MIT did a very good study on this, that unfortunately the negative in social media is shared much more often and we're made aware of it much more often. But that doesn't mean that we want to, I hate to say this, all create more Jerry Springer shows. That's probably not fair.
But nostalgic on us. Come on.
A fair comment. But no, we can't take the dark side here. We have to go to the positive side. And again, I do think we're ready for that. And probably, I hadn't thought of this till just now. Thank you for triggering me on this. Our 250th year anniversary is coming up. And this is all about what? This is about America being great, right?
It's about democracy, isn't it?
I think I heard something about that.
Remember? 1776, 1976.
Isn't that what we fought about? Now, it seems ironic that we have a quasi-authoritarian regime that's celebrating something that's totally anathema to who they are. I love the irony.
So what an opening for the Democrats to leverage that, right? Well, Trump is not going to, he'll try to do a parade and nobody will come, right? So Trump is not going to be in effect because he just doesn't take the positive side of things. So we have a real opportunity here, I think. Thank you for giving me that thought.
Good point. And speaking of positive, I love that you did use AI in your book. You encourage readers of your book to use AI themselves. Richard and I talk a lot about AI, much more not on the show, although we talk a lot about it here. We might single out things that worry us, that concern us about AI, but it can be such a constructive, I don't know if we can call it a tool, or wouldn't you agree, Richard?
Yeah, it's a wild horse. If you could put a saddle on it and teach it and train it how to respond, but you never take your hands off the stirrups or the, I was going to say leash, but I'm not an expert horse rider, but yeah, you know what I'm talking about. If you can look at AI within that context, then you can do wonders with it. It's just, I think what happens is people confuse speed with accuracy. And I write a lot about how lawyers misuse AI, and there's been thousands of instances of falsified citations appearing in court because attorneys use ChatGPT to do discovery and research and come back with falsified cases and bring them into court, and the judge,
They might not even know it.
they don't even know it. But that's an example of what I call improper AI hygiene, where people are not using it appropriately. And that we need to talk more about, because most people talk about AI from the perspective of the tool, the technology, when it's really the primary focus should be on the human.
And you raised a great point, Richard, that Bryan, I'd love to hear you speak about. Again, I've known you for about 20 years now, and I love how you understand how the human brain works, how you write down 10 ideas because it's the next set that might have the one that you really need, and you prompt people with little cards and field trips. I love all the things you do for the human brain. So we're talking about the human brain and what's uniquely human, and bots and technology. And you're the perfect guy to hear what's the best way to blend those two?
And thank you. That's a great question. Let me just say something about AI and research, because Richard brought it up. In the first or second or third draft of the current book, I wanted each chapter to have a research study that validated the idea, right? I did all those, and then I went back and I looked at them all. 90% of them were made up, incorrect.
Oh,
And then I said, maybe, and I'm not kidding. The MIT study made it through, but the other 9 out of 10 of them were not, didn't exist. And then I said, maybe I can handle this and say, it has to have a URL with it. That still didn't solve it. So you have to be very careful. And the key here is that it is a wonderful tool, but it's not a good master. I like the wild horse analogy that Richard shared, but it's a brainstorming tool. But you have to be judicious and very conscious of the fact that it can hallucinate, as we all know. To answer your question, Tom, about AI and ideation processes, the story I sometimes tell is that people say, well, you just do brainstorming sessions. And I say, well, no, brainstorming, which you may or may not know, was a technique invented in the 30s by Alex Osborne, the O of BBDO ad agency. And he had a good insight. Withhold judgment, and lots of ideas will lead to some good ones. In the late 50s, Yale did a study, and they said it wasn't overly effective, but those are important principles. And the example I sometimes tell is Oreo cookie. We did quite a bit of work for Mondelez and Chips Ahoy, et cetera. And how long has the Oreo cookie been around? It's over 100 years, right? So if I go in there and say, hey, who's got some ideas? Withhold judgment, and let's get some more ideas. Like, should throw me out of the room. Give me a break. So we bring in semantic intuition, or silly idea / worst idea, or we have dozens and dozens of different ways to trigger the brain, collaging and picture prompts, et cetera, that we use to get new ideas. So the key is extra stimuli. That's what separates ideation from brainstorming. And now we have a tool that makes this stimuli even better. So I go into sessions now, and I have sometimes hundreds of pages of ideas and stimuli that I'm using to trigger the group to get really great ideas that have been generated by AI. And so we're looking to AI for ideas. We're looking to AI for stimuli. Yeah. So it's a tool, to Richard's word, I think you would use the word tool, to help people come up with ideas. But boy, the essential word there is help. And the other essential word there is people. And you got to have both of those.
I apologize for interrupting you. Here's a question I've always wondered. I don't know if there's even an answer, but again, you might be the perfect person to.
The answer is yes. No, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, we have these ideas and information and then memories in our brain. Are they little cells? What is it exactly? They bounce off one another, metaphorically at least. And I think that's what you do in some of your work as well. It's just, what's going on there? How do you explain that?
There was a famous book written by Kessler, and it was called By Association, right? The notion is this thing plus that thing, you'll get a new thing, right? And that's all there is to creativity. Some of the work we've done, we've looked at having a threefer, a tripart thing. And then all of a sudden the ideas can be even more important because it's not this plus that, but maybe the emotional So anyway, so we sometimes use the principles of threes. But the reason that you have these techniques, you have AI, but you also have people with cross-functionality, different backgrounds. By the way, I thought that was the most important component of a successful ideation session. Turns out Google, you may know this study, it was called the Aristotle study. They did a year-long study of groups and what made them successful. And it wasn't cross-functionality. That was number 2. The first one was trust. You had to build trust among people because they're willing to say crazy things. So anyway, so the point here is the reason you have cross-functionality is because people have, to your point, Tom, they have all these weird things bouncing around in your head. And if you can provide the stimuli for them to connect not only stuff in their own brain, but with other people's brains, oh my gosh, you're off and running. And that's the way you get breakthrough ideas.
Cool. Plus you get a different angle. One of my favorite conservative of all things journalists was George Will.
Yes.
Even though I'm not conservative, he was a very eloquent speaker. And we had a conversation about this just last week. I always respected him because his viewpoint was always based in facts and objective.
Yes.
But he was also a great baseball guy. And he wrote a book in the 80s. He was an Orioles fan. And the way he wrote about baseball from a more intellectual standpoint made me see the game. I've always considered myself, I was involved with sabermetrics and Bill James and that more statistical oriented angle and viewpoint of baseball. And so was he. He just kind of raised the bar for really understanding the game of baseball, while at the same time, sure, he wrote about Koufax and about some of the great Oriole players and some of their idiosyncrasies. And it was just so fascinating. But I think that's the point that you're making, is that we have much to contribute outside of our own swim lanes that oftentimes can help because we get stuck in the swim lane, in the seeing the deer in the headlights, so to speak, and ideation within ourselves. We need people disseminating views. Yeah.
I think that's
We love that. I remember an interview with George Will where he said, yeah, my best-selling book was the baseball book. It kind of made sense. But yeah, a lot of the stuff we bring in is kind of fact-based because you want to start with stuff that's true and real and viable and all the rest. And if you can start with that and trigger with that, boy, you're off into some really good territory. And you may come to different conclusions than I might with George Will, but even you love listening to the guy because he starts with the facts. Wouldn't that be nice in these times? I think that's a chapter I missed.
Tom, we want to hand the baton to you because we want to pivot a little bit, Bryan, because Tom worked at CBS. I went to journalism school and studied the pantheons at CBS growing up. And this week there was some really disturbing news, certainly around 60 Minutes, but it's been building up to this. And Tom, I'll hand it to you because I know this is a personal.
Yeah, no, we try to focus each episode. We try. People might be watching this a week from now, months from now, and so on. That will still be very useful because of our conversation, we believe. But what's happening right now at CBS News is very concerning. I did get my start there at the CBS News Washington Bureau. I did work with Charles Kuralt for many years. I even worked with Walter Cronkite, which was quite an honor. And Bryan, you're talking about ideas and conviction and trust also. I remember being caught up in I think I was caught up in 2 rounds of layoffs. We need to lay off 300 people. It's like we're pleasing the stockholders. Larry Tisch of Lowe's Hotels was the owner during part of my time there. So there's all these motivations, outside forces and so on. Now it's the Ellison family. But Scott Pelley stood up and said, you're murdering 60 Minutes. You're murdering our network. And did he really expect to remain employed after that? I don't know. But I thought it was interesting what you said a minute ago about trust. And it's like, we need morale, good morale to really do our best work. And again, Richard and I on these episodes often talk about that sense of civic responsibility. I still believe there are journalists out there who do have civic responsibility. They're not just It's also interesting. We told us about people's attention span. Like, how can we harness that attention span? And what do we give them that they must need? But if you can really serve them with all these things in mind, I really admire the people that do that. So there's a lot of turmoil going on at CBS News right now.
Yeah, I actually, I don't know if we got the assignment, but I remember walking the halls of CBS when this was occurring, and everybody was just sitting at their desks doing nothing, waiting for something to happen, for the sword to fall. And it was such a weird environment to walk into as an outsider. I felt bad for everybody there, frankly.
Morale is important. Yeah. It's not that it was bad really during my time, but again, when you know that you might be caught up,
Yeah.
I don't want to start psychoanalyzing myself, but I think appreciation has something to do with it. These people work hard. They feel committed. They feel a sense of, they were not elected by anyone, but they still, for the most part, I really believe, feel a sense of responsibility to the public. I'm doing this for the public. So when people are cutting your legs out from under you, it's demoralizing. I don't know.
And you mentioned, Tom, before about the Fairness Doctrine in '87, which was repealed by the Reagan administration, which on one hand removed the necessity or the doctrine around providing equal access and both sides of the equation. But network news started to reorganize as early as the 1990s, when you mentioned Larry Tisch, and corporations started acquiring networks. And then we saw it all around, and there were layoffs as more people from corporate and advertising and non-news found their way into newsrooms and news organizations. So this is not new, but I think what's different about this.
One quick thing before you move on, because I was reading about it. I know we talk about the Fairness Doctrine every week, and I say, let me educate myself a little bit about it. And so apparently during the Lyndon Johnson administration, some of those high-placed officials used the Fairness Doctrine to put a lid on right-wing opinions. They saw that, we can't cast hero in the white hat and the villain, like your book, Bryan. It's like, we can't simplify things like that. It's a little more complicated.
Absolutely. And, what happened with Vietnam and the Johnson administration parallels in some ways to what's happened in Iran and also in Iraq. And it's just a perpetual example of misbehavior that crosses political parties, for sure. But I think what's unique about this one is the reports about gutting CBS and neutering CBS as a consequence to allow the Ellisons to increase the scope of their media empire by a quid pro quo, that by doing so and neutering CBS makes them less of a voice against the administration, which then in turn can result in favorable moves to enable the Ellisons to consolidate their media empire even further, when in years past, antitrust and other mechanisms would likely have prohibited that from happening. So I think that's the additional message. You're right. People getting fired from journalism positions has been happening for 30 or 40 years, and some of it unjust, some of it questionable. And we're journalists, so of course, any journalist that gets fired is probably one too many from our perspective.
As far as, again, I just did a little bit of reading online. It could be a lot. I asked AI to educate me. God only knows, but no, I read about how the Supreme Court, again, going back several decades, they said there's a shortage. The reason the Fairness Doctrine was implemented was because there's a shortage of bandwidth for all these radio stations and so on. So therefore, we need the government to oversee. You're pushing this agenda too much. But in the the time we live in right now, there is no limit. And certainly with AI, as Bryan, telling us so beautifully, it's an exciting time to be here. So maybe that can lead to that optimistic picture that we're hoping to see. Anyway.
Yeah, just to build on what you guys have said, again, how do we take a positive side on this? And so for NPR, which obviously has had been tortured their existence, one of the ideas that's in the last section of the book is that NPR should be promoting that they're America's town square. And that has ramifications or nostalgia echoes with the founding of our country, right? Which is wonderful and timely, and tell human stories and That's not a great example, but it's at least one of how we can take, again, it's incumbent on us to be creative about how we deal with this stuff. And we don't want to take the dark side. And it's weird, but this wave is going to end. And I'm an optimist, so we're going to come back. And we're going to be excited about the world and the future. Thank goodness.
Not a moment too soon. Yeah, I know.
Ryan, I wanted to ask you about, because you mentioned this earlier, that the Democrats have some opportunities. Based on your research of Trump, and again, applying this in the positive realm, what are like maybe the top 3 messages that Democrats should really be embracing based on your research that they're completely missing because they just don't look at it the same way that some of those marketing principles you've uncovered? Well,
Yeah, one of the principles that Trump has used is non-specifics. He'll say stuff, but there's absolutely, there are no facts. It's just make it great, America great again. What the heck does that mean? Yeah, the slogan. So what's powerful about that from an audience perspective and a tribe creation is that people fill in that what that could mean for them. It's job security, it's healthcare, whatever it is. The Democrats, democracy depends on fill in the blank. What does it depend on? And get people to be proactive and interactive in the ideas they come up with. Democracy. This is the next American chapter that you can co-create. Oh my gosh, I can? I'm excited. What does that mean?
Yeah.
You can fill in the blank, right? So part of this, believe it or not, which is kind of weird, but it is the principle of not being overly specific about what you want people to co-create. Because if they, and we know this in our ideation work, we have people who have to go implement these ideas. We want them to be part of the creation. So an important idea here is that people are part of the creation of what democracy does and could mean in these times. And again, we have a wonderful window of opportunity because of the history of the United States.
Yeah, and the fact that we are in a pseudo-authoritarian scenario where
Yes,
we didn't contribute at all to the current political mantra, and many people who even voted for Trump are beginning to see that maybe this is not what I was expecting.
and one of the things I said in this editorial I just sent out was that there's a danger if the Democrats just focus on Donald Trump bad, us good. If you do that, you're still putting him at the center of the conversation, right? And so no, let's have the positive things that we want to focus on and let everybody else talk about why he's not good for the country. Because we're all trying to buy gasoline, so we know. So we got that covered.
And before I toss it back to Tom, yeah, you mentioned Mamdani. I live in New York City.
Yep.
And I was on the fence in the election, and I don't want to reveal what direction I went, but I have to say I was turned off by all the negative campaigning by Cuomo and others against Mamdani. That one of the things they say Trump is very effective at is repurposing himself as not the atrocity creator, but the victim. And I think that was even somewhat effective for Mamdani, because all the race baiting, all the hedge fund money, everything that was coming in from the other sides to try to tear him down, he didn't really respond to it like you said. He let it resonate to the people the way it really truly appeared. And I think if the Democrats, to your point, that this is not trying to coach them, but I think they really need to go back to square one and relearn marketing for the proper approach. So let's see.
Yeah. Well, thank
Yeah,
you.
one of my promotional ideas, which I probably won't do, but it's just to go down to Washington with 400 or 500 copies of this book and just give them to all the Democrats as they're walking in to vote for something.
But I remember JFK Jr., he rest in peace, when George Magazine came out, they had the people handing out copies of George Magazine.
Yes, probably.
It's probably,
Yes.
I remember.
and there's a great store in Washington, named it Politics and Prose Bookstore.
Oh, yes.
And actually, lady, I've asked to join us as a guest. She's asking Barry Weiss if it's allowed. So that means, of course, she can't join us. But I worked with her at Night Watch with Charlie Rose, and she worked with Cronkite and produced Meet the Press and Face the Nation and so on. And but she had a Q&A, in-person Q&A session with Bob Woodward or whoever the guest may be. But yeah, I'll connect you with her. And also she worked with Charles Carl at CBS Sunday Morning. And I think you and your book would make an excellent story on Sunday Morning. I don't know if they would be touchy about, we're kind of going under the cover of Donald Trump, but just the idea, because I think about polarization. And a few weeks ago, I was driving down the street here in a small town. There's the huge rumbling pickup truck with a huge flag. And I was feeling road rage come on. And I say, wait a minute, if I met this guy over beer, maybe he would have something to say. Well, the reason that I voted for, I have the Trump sticker on the base because this happened in my family and this happened. It's like,
Yes.
who am I to judge that person?
Yes. That's great stuff, Tom. And I appreciate your saying that. As we know early on, Trump didn't say, he said, they're not coming to get me. They're coming to get you. And that was one of the surprising things that I learned when I did the research, because I assumed, because he's such an egomaniac, that everything would be about him. But if you look at his speeches, a lot of it is about you. And I'm here to help you with all these,
I'm your savior.
training.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm your savior.
It's
And
peace,
And a big part of that, too, is creating an enemy. He's not necessarily a cult leader, but all cult leaders, they have to create an enemy. And Trump has been a master at creating enemies.
One of the things I postulated is that they probably uploaded Mein Kampf into ChatGPT and said, draft me a playbook.
Draft what?
Draft me a playbook.
Look, I have to share this. Sarah Silverman, the stand-up comic, she was so funny. She was saying, Mein Kampf, my struggle, that's very Jewish to me.
It's cute.
That was great.
Wonderful. We could go on for another hour, but
Thanks, you guys.
I'll let you go. But
I just have one final question, Brian, if you could give a quickie. So journalism is experiencing the same institutional creativity crisis you're diagnosing in corporations: suppressed dissent, process discipline, replaced by ideology and whatnot. What's the antidote to that? What do journalists have to do to recoup their standing and efficacy?
Part of it is the form that they share their findings in, right? So it has to be in media appropriate ways, easily digestible, visual, taglines, and all that kind of stuff. We have to be in the modern economy of how we share these ideas. That's one thing. The other thing, too, is that I think that there's frankly, a dearth of new ideas. And I think journalism can lead the way in coming up with all kinds of different ways of thinking about things. But it can't be in policy papers. Again, I would just reiterate, it has to be in symbols. And if you're saying, let's sell it to put it in a symbol, come on, pal, nobody's going to read it or hear about it unless you figured out a way to make it for the attention economy, right? And so the key here is that journalists, in my opinion, should be learning, I hate to say this, to be more creative about how they share the facts and what they've learned and what they're writing about. And AI can help them do that. All the ideation processes that I've been talking about for the last 30 years that people are still not using, all those can be vehicles for helping journalists not only come up with what they're going to say, but how they're going to say it. And unfortunately, I think journalism schools are not necessarily teaching how to say things in these times. And that has to change because, my gosh, if we don't have the journalists, let's go somewhere else. The journalists are those who speak truth to power, and we need them.
Yeah,
Which is why we are talking about true journalism, Tom.
Yeah, thanks, you guys. Yeah,
it's a great ideas you've shared with us today. I really appreciate it.
It was a lot of fun, you guys. Thank you.
Yes,
And keep doing it. Keep doing it.
thank you. Yeah, we definitely will. We appreciate it, and I'll make some introductions for you because I really love your book.
Looking forward.
So people can find it on Amazon, I think.
It's on Amazon, and hopefully as we figure out this Ingram Spark thing, it'll be in bookstores, hopefully in a few weeks. We'll see. But they can certainly get it on Amazon. Absolutely.
And how can people contact you, especially some people who worked up about what you just forgot that, Peter.
The lawyers will be contacting Mattimore at growth-engine.com. They can search my name, Bryan, Bryan Mattimore, Mattimore. But it's growth-engine.com is the website. But again, if you just put the title, the Trump's Playbook, all my information will show up on Amazon, and then you can track me down on LinkedIn. So thank you. Yes.
We enjoyed it. Hang tight. We always end the show with just 5 little snapshots of what's in the news. If that
Great. I'd love to hear what's in the news.
you can feel free to jump in if you want to interject. Richard, you want to go ahead, sir?
Sure. We call it the wire of the top 5, and it's really stories where there's some spin or propaganda or variation of what the facts versus what's reported on. And of course, we talked about the 60 Minutes purge, where Scott Pelley said Barry Weiss is murdering the show, as Tom said, whereas she characterized it as a recommitment to fairness. And the new EP, Nick Bilton, says Weiss loves 60 Minutes. So that's the front-facing piece, which doesn't really agree with the actions. Obviously, Simon, Mihaljevic, Vega, Alfonsi, members of the 60 Minutes crew fired with no cause given. Obviously, Scott Pelley did get fired for cause because he basically lashed out at both of them and called them essentially unqualified for being Barry Weiss and Bilton for their position. So kind of the dichotomy in how things are reported on that. And then, Tom?
Yeah, no, that I've been enjoying. I spend a lot of time on social media, I must confess, as you both probably know. And so it's been interesting to be in CBS alumni groups and what people are saying about it. And it's quite the story. But story number 2 that we want to focus on, and it's interesting how ideas bounce off one another as we were discussing. But Pope Leo, the 14th encyclical regarding AI, saying AI must be disarmed. And tech industry has framed the Pope's encyclical as a spiritual opinion piece, and Breitbart, with their views, have labeled it woke overreach. But it's interesting. And again, it's interesting. Like I said, ideas bouncing off one another. I was on a call earlier today regarding an author client. I handle PR for authors, and she's written a book about communicating change within a company, like a pharmaceutical company. It becomes CBS News is a very good example. And how wouldn't it be interesting to do a story about how is the Pope communicating, and you seem to be butting heads with Donald Trump, but maybe they are really on the same page. If we could, so your principles are quite fascinating. But
Yeah, and then the third story we report on is that President Trump cursed at Netanyahu over Lebanon and then announced a ceasefire that Lebanon denied. The White House called Trump's intervention a diplomatic masterstroke, claiming Israel and Hezbollah agreed to stop shooting. Israel's defense minister denied any ceasefire existed. Lebanon has recorded 3,400 plus killed since March 2nd, 10,000 plus wounded.
And certainly in the news over the past day or two have been Trump allegedly yelling at Netanyahu, "You'd be in prison if it wasn't for me," and things are heating up on that front. So I'm curious to see what happens next. But on another Trump theme, I bet this is in your book, having to do with the big, beautiful bill, as it's been putting a label on it, right?
Yes.
Big, beautiful bill. So Medicaid cuts have clicked in the Congressional Budget Office. I'm surprised that wasn't totally eliminated. I guess they forgot about that part. It says 12 million people will lose coverage. Amazing. So the administration frames the Medicaid work requirements, and you were talking about work, which I thought was interesting, that New York Times op-ed that you mentioned, that the work requirements target waste, fraud, and abuse and return the program to its original mission. And I can see how a lot of people would support that idea. Trump, again, the Congressional Budget Office says that this adds $3.4 trillion to the deficit and strips coverage from nearly 12 million people. So it's pros and cons.
There's been a mixed message around cuts versus obviously to pay for the big, beautiful bill. Doge gutted many government agencies and whatnot. So that's a very painful juxtapose that we often talk about. And finally is with AI companies, essentially there are 5 large AI companies, and we know who they are: OpenAI, Anthropic, X, Microsoft, etc. Google, of course. And we're seeing individual states now and passing laws on AI governance and AI protocols. When in December, the president passed a law, basically an executive order that I think has since been tied up in court, advising these states to repeal their laws that they don't have any validity. States have been responding to their own laws to protect their citizens against AI abuse and misuse because the federal government has not come down with any federal mandates to check these 5 super players in the AI space. The Trump administration signals intent to preempt these state laws as overly burdensome. And of course, the tech lobby and the AI enthusiasts warn of a compliance splinter net, meaning that these laws vary from state to state. And if you're attempting to do business in California and Illinois and some in Colorado or in Texas, all of whom have individual laws relating to AI governance, some of whom are heading in the direction of Sarbanes-Oxley, where they're going to be requiring an audit trail when they use AI in legal briefs or financial analysis or client work. But again, this is all in response to the fact that the federal government has essentially no centralized AI governance laws and are in practicality enabling the AI companies to be able to build their data farms and expand their scope and reach with impunity. So interesting things as they play out. Bryan, any thoughts on any of your solo stories?
Yeah, I just on the last one, I got to hand it to Anthropic because there was a class action suit against them for appropriating copyrighted material. And by the way, I'm expecting a check from them from the class action suit. Two of my books were appropriated, 99% inspiration and 21 days to a big idea, maybe idea stormers too. Anyway, so that was fun. But I do admire them for pushing back on having their AI service used in defense or bellicose wartime usage. And so I got to hand it to those guys. And so we'll hope that there's a certain internal regulation that's going on here besides the external regulation.
Good point. Good point.
Bryan, it's been a real thrill to have you on the program today. And yeah, and your views are just amazing to generate new ideas, folks, with getting out there and ideating and talking with people and using AI as a great brainstorm.
I like your optimism. Can't get enough of that.
Yeah, thanks, you guys. The thrill is mine. This has been really fun for me. And I got a whole bunch of ideas that I hadn't thought of before, which is the whole idea here. So thank you. Thank you, guys.
All right. 60 Minutes lost its creative independence to a merger deal. The Pope said AI needs to be disarmed before it erases the human capacity for conscience. And the president announced a ceasefire that neither side confirmed. Apply Bryan's audit to every one of those stories, and who benefits when the methodology dies? Build your foundation on that question, and we'll see you on the next wire.
Great. Thank you both. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, you guys.
Good night and good luck.